There we go. The United States federal government should eliminate first-rank nuclear counterforce missions related to damage limitation. Advantage 1 is primacy. First counterforce targeting fuels and locks in nuclear primacy. Lever and press 6. The U.S. now stands on the verge of attaining nuclear primacy. The rise of U.S. nuclear primacy has a significant limitation to the relationship of the world's greatest power to nuclear signaling during conflict, demonstrating powerful force or a great power peace. The nuclear battle should further favor the U.S. nuclear primacy months may last a decade before counterforce would entail enormous risks and costs. Nuclear weapons may no longer produce the peace-producing feeling that they did during the Cold War. Counterforce is the key internal link to nuclear primacy. Marco 615. The U.S. is committed to maintaining the strategic primacy. So what is the policy of things? I doubt whether there will be much change in as far as the counterforce is concerned for any state that aspires to strategic primacy. Mutual deterrence is complete no-no. The U.S. must first be politically committed to abandoning the role of the military power placement, submitting hegemonic positions higher. This must come first after this, and I'm optimistic about a move towards a more mutual deterrence at low numbers. And there are two internal links. First is superpower war conflicts will escalate to great power. Nuclear war for perception-based conflict will fuel arms race accidents and unauthorized use. Even if Russia and China don't modernize, will still trigger nuclear war in a crisis. Lever and press 6. U.S. nuclear records are hard to explain the mission of the nuclear research of the nuclear power understanding of force other others. That's going to be a great counterforce against Russia and force numbers and learning procedures to not have the desire. It's currently directly being interpreted as a tools necessary to retain U.S. military supremacy. The ship could significantly be information on the great areas of the war for the U.S. growing up to Russia to reduce forward defense of the behavior of pressure Russia to reduce the steps they take. The signal between them and intense nuclear arms race. These steps increase the danger of including arms race, accidental nuclear warnings, and limitations have been triggered into dynamics during the crisis of war. Russia tries to not reduce the vulnerability of the do so in the crisis. Third, U.S. leadership will soon have the option of launching a disarmament against another country in a new era of those programs. U.S. policymakers may ultimately continue considering the escalation during an intense crisis. And second is transition primacy will inevitably collapse. Attempting to reform the status quo will accelerate this decline. Only a shift in strategy can soften the effects of America's fighting. Page 9, America's president decline over Iraq dead. Economic weakness Bush. The unchallenged dominance of the company no longer realistic for the past 8 years. After state of influence and violence, the ultimate foundation of American power has been identified to be sure. The negatives of U.S. relative to has been thus far fairly short-lived. So America's shrinking share of the world economic production and world changes the U.S. range strategy are necessary to prevent the American school position from accelerating the war in Afghanistan. Nuclear relations and Russia are high priority issues. Solution to each of them individually and all of them collectively capitally against the way America's reduced our position in the world. America's decline power means that the war is coming to an end. And this multipolarity is coming. Global balance is key to prevent extinction. After 9 years, conservative movement for the West is taking Afghanistan in the recession of 30 years. China's coming fast. The EU's expansion into European countries in the south are trying to require more geopolitical have global problems like climate change and financial collapse require global solutions. So we here are all back into extinction. We have to defeat nuclear primary in Afghanistan and all learning the world is trying to little to prevent North Korea finally had the $1 billion range. The red ink is mounting, and unipolarity exacerbates the risk of economic shocks, disease, and environmental collapse. Jervis 9. A related question that what kind of threats can be shown by the security of unipolarity is no guarantee these economic shocks, monster disease, and environmental degradation. These are more likely under unipolarity in the absence of the fears of unipolar lack of staying unipolarity is not stable against no form of threat. New pandemics cause extinction breakers. States are going to try to oppress the earth, will be the world's critical issue that many kids is not just that the word is a big one, and the loss of biodiversity is incalculably disastrous. Chen to K, the value of biodiversity is literally incalculable. The biodiversity is growing, it is the arguably the loss is worse than the energy depletion, economic cost of people who are caused by a totally totalitarian government regime, and the loss of growth guarantees global nuclear warfare. We're going to shop it in A. Additional foreign policy challenges are multiplying in such a scenario. Their issues such as everything global trade and financial grounds, as well as low engineering evolves in democracies, financial operating powers, they exploited their divisions. Additionally, the shapes of framing of debate primacy doesn't talk to generally and isn't attainable or clock 9. The framing of debate contemporary international order has been made in highly motivated with U.S. communities to enjoy some of the substantial albeit no qualified primacy in international affairs will currently translated into generally most answers probably this was the idea of American national largely unattainable in present conditions, and even if primacy is good, counterforce decimates the available arsenal will allow third nation states to assume primacy. Word 7. Expanding the U.S. strategic arsenal and now all attack against Russia by the U.S. behind Great Britain, France, China, and Israel, the nuclear became over the attack they must probably the U.S. transition to nuclear primacy attack will also leave the U.S. and global decision to be regenerated nuclear primacy is increasingly a crime because of the economic and policy of nuclear predator, all scared to say second class nuclear status, and the emergence of window vulnerability and to explore the nature of the twins crisis ability among several states that possess nuclear arsenals at different sizes and survivability. Advantage 2 is Russian sub-bumping nuclear counterforce distorts Russian threat perception that ensures Russian nuclear modernization and fostering Lever and Press 7. Nuclear counterforce capabilities pressure Russia to modernize their arsenals and raise the readiness of nuclear forces leaders to mounting within the extension deals counterforce capabilities and reacted anger with Russian efficiency of converting to ready for production. In the Russian use the ICBMs for Russian VM, Grad predicts the on Russia's nuclear forces and the recent nuclear substance incident likes the U.S. and Russia into the nuclear scene. Now, future Russian involvement in the Western Hemisphere significantly heightens the U.S. nuclear capabilities. God 811. Russian nuclear attack on submarines are off the coast of the Eastern Seaboard. The ghost of the research in Russia helps to justify capabilities and partisan unconventional warfare. And has said no longer the U.S. no longer needs your military missions are designed to irritate the U.S. being sent nuclear substances instead of the coast of Georgia and have a chain list of complete answers of why the Russians are there. Process a way to signal that what is good for Bruce is good for the other. U.S. involves what it involves in something where Russia sees it as its neighbor of the Western Hemisphere is not influenced and wants to expect these missions to continue, and muscle flexing is targeting the U.S. and feels a growing trend of provocative acts and threats from Brooks 87. The Russians are trying to exert themselves in the great power of the military muscle flexing directly to speaking Christian word and crime targets despite the White House efforts to bring a reset in relation to the Kremlin is still instead of U.S. policies and trends and not to treat it worse simply with Moscow wanted to substitute protected so as to send a signal in Washington the main line and sort of was above the White House was come around all the Russians saying that something the Pentagon spheres should be worrying about. The Pentagon perceives the substance Russian reassertion of military might in PR. The Russian attack on the submarines are on the coast of the east coast of the U.S. The secret capital reassert Russian military might morale spokesman of the Pentagon. They acknowledge that the Russians have stepped forward to project the military front. We've seen long-range Russian bombers fly east and across the force in South America as well. That is never their to project forces around the world, and specifically new anti-submarine technology will enhance the threat of the U.S. nuclear counterforce culminating in uncontrollable nuclear escalation. Schwartz 6 and improvements are inconsistent with the aim of deterring the adversary's nuclear attack. They are enhanced their disarmed counterforce strengthening in a preemptive nuclear attack. And when the nuclear war is found for reports of the defensive capabilities, the preemptive counterforce capability of Russia and China, the rest of the numbers and operating procedure should now know the nuclear analysis propaganda as it is on the only growing coming here. The U.S. is pursuing a series of initiatives, including further anti-submarine warfare that will remain Russia and China nuclear forces all more widely likely capability to increase the risk of great power warfare for the growing nuclear knowledge. Russia and China will be forced to readdress it. It's more than half a century of analyzing nuclear dangers and crisis stability. So the thing is that all these attempts can cause crisis to escalate and control the trigger and invert nuclear war. The ramifications of the state of affairs are the greatest significance to America's security in the world. Time for security and debate to begin. And counterforce provokes the highest likelihood of a Russian strike. A single launch will cause total devastation. Unilateral reductions reflect a posture that enables effective dialogue without any hit to deterrence. Conference 5. Counterforce, no matter how effectively be committing national suicide, can to significantly increase the number of weapons and alert and threat here to represent what they can offer any additional protection. The highest probability of Russian strike is leadership or totally unauthorized actions by the commander against those retaining situations. The defense grants little defense of our own strategic nuclear system to provide no protection. A single unauthorized launch can now initiate total devastation of both countries. Unilateral reductions have been that the Russians are willing to turn strong central leader with autocracy under economic parties that also provides the trust between Russia and the Western nations, complicating the efforts to reduce nuclear systems. The active cooperation with strategic nuclear forces reduction can provide an alternative to incentives to renew cooperation with the West. A unilateral reduction has the advantage of not blocking the nation at a specific level of weapons, not only at the future reversals of how became necessary in unilateral reduction would free internal resources and offer opportunity for a very positive exchange with Russia. And any counterforce solves accidental and determined new weapons launch and nuclear war from faster and better and fight. Nuclear counterforce would provide benefits only a tiny fraction of the conflicts management with the U.S. and a highly effective deterrent of weapons mission close to counterforce targets. Can be destroyed as the U.S. conventional weapons, weapons that have suspension could bring a variety of costs relying on nuclear counterforce risky because the U.S. does the bar targets to be more likely to be attacking the nuclear weapons by determined adversary doctrine. Emphasizes the conventional conflict and the probability that an adversary would accidentally use a nuclear weapon during a crisis. In pursuing a nuclear counterforce capability would prevent this ability to maintain and strengthen the law of proliferation regime to the nuclear capability damage to the U.S. international perception of the U.S. should not rely on nuclear counterforce. Additionally, only the case can solve counterforce mission that drives all U.S. nuclear doctrinal requirements. Kristen Norris and Lower 9. Counterforce missions address the dangerous characteristics of nuclear force and show the head of the strike identification with the balance characterization of the U.S. nuclear weapons being on air trigger alert or debate or discussing the equivalent pressure we're in today or according to given our strategy and policy. Therefore, one wants to do something different and less to commander because nuclear force with a different government the counterforce mission to be explicitly abandoned. This reduces the ECMS of nuclear weapons almost been requirements of nuclear weapons. From the counterforce mission under a minimum deterrence factor and reasons for reliability, accuracy, response time, all the performance characteristics can't be loosened.
this second page, you read this piece of Brooks evidence that Russian muscle flexing will trigger provocative acts. Your Brooks evidence describes the motivation for Russia's muscle flexing as, quote, there's international politics. The Russians are trying to exert themselves to the great power on the world stage. A little military muscle flexing rarely fails to make an impression. We're a prime target. Even if the United States gets rid of counterforce, why wouldn't Russia still have an incentive to make these sort of aggressive posturing moves just as a way to increase their international influence?
I mean, that in the context of just that piece of evidence as a reading, that might be true, but put in the context of our counterforce arguments that we see, such as what Lieber and President.
The thing that most directly threatens their international influence is that since the Cold War they've fallen behind the United States. Those two things are intimately related. They're not alternate.
Okay, sure, but even if the United States gives up counterforce options, why doesn't Russia still have an incentive to kind of show off their power, which your evidence seems to indicate they'd like to do?
That's, once again, just this piece of evidence. The Lieber President says that this is the fundamental motivation for this type of saber
Well,
it's not something we couldn't
the
connect.
piece of Bostad evidence says, as NATO powers advance the borders of Russia, being able to send nuclear submarines off the coast of Georgia and have channels in the Pentagon to answer to while the Russians are there is Moscow's way of signaling that what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Right. I don't really know what good for the goose, good for the gander means, but either way, your evidence seems to imply that NATO expansion is a trigger point for Russian aggression. How does your plan prevent the U.S. push for countries like Ukraine and Georgia to get in NATO?
I mean, that's a reason why they would be expanding their geopolitical interests generally. It's not a reason why they'd be pushing those against the United States. That would be the counterforce policy or
well, your evidence, the line I just read, seems to indicate that the reason they're developing these subs that you say are an internal conflict.
That kind of draws an analogy between Georgia and Europe and Georgia and the United States. That good for the goose, good for the gander argument is an analogy between those two situations. Our evidence says that the increasing threat that Russia feels makes them feel like they have to not only demonstrate to the other countries that are
increasing threat from NATO expansion.
Well, that's the analogy it draws, but it's within the context of a great power.
It seems to NATO expansion is a threat.
Well, the judges like this piece of evidence that good for the goose, good for the gander part will be a little bit clearer because after Georgia, it puts in parentheses the United States.
Yeah, and the thing is, even if we stop that, that's a brink argument. The reason why tensions might happen. Or Lieber and press evidence is the major reason why a large conflict.
I got one more question. So the first internal link on your first advantage, the superpower evidence. Your piece of evidence says if Russia and China do not act. All right. Can you understand? Russia. Yeah, read this.
5, Russia, primacy.
Okay. Take this down.
5, Russia, primacy.
Healthcare, human life, against time, class size, before the same was our case, piece of all the government was on the tomorrow, we'll see a passion for life, the government state this day, and say the health insurance is found about the capital discovery, the village state of not option to fall, anything that health will be huge, I love president, needs our representation, that was women, the bottom reason, and judge, low win, high cost, all campus of DNA to A, not lack of consensus with the give our hospitals, care, and the most possible not to have actually, vaccine, trust, guys, have protection, new doctor, the centers to be used by recommendations, by commissions, for a new construction statement, a basic, one of the president, must be holding this marriage now, every one of the countries is doing as usual fee, take flight, go down, healthcare without surgery, fact, government, healthcare, with slide, can't even feel satisfied, I can't have a conference, everything, trying to accomplish, price, and work together, sufficient deal, work on wrong, understand that, in this case, all boring, really not, can't look at your conversation, very long, it's not the average, keeping this below, 30% of your place, in fact, not content, not the fish, we say, or something nice work table, last year's the Hogans, last year's going with the hitting their maneuvers, obstacles, which are engine, involved in the soft protection, project, video, and eventually go over and start saying, and we pick one, coming, first, speaking, great man, once again, capital shredder and extinction tickle and tickle down same idea. Then we did that several going we get extinction the top of the large scratch around by the tail first going to lost much more power with hers. Here expressing usually these buildings the village guys also really stored are they already underway. And talk about sanctions about your qualification blocks, all the one section between qualification B, right? So that application has been rolled, no one can produce though. Now you're going to certain tasks, people, and all the failures, roles, between side of the bench, I think normal people too. And now you're going to try and find out something. Reduction values, then you get win K. And that's what you want to avoid and sort of produce, you have to produce raising down the creates around 2.5 shot values. And now you have different arguments, social reprocessing down on certain products, every safety number, that's a strategy that. And what's okay, that's the illusion realization starting from other produce that went on for your death house. Learning to make these five also industrial energy based on certain intelligence expressing down. And the world is heavily optimistic, confused to accept different cost escalation, more rash. Learning the past week, the polar for these polar to be. Different weaving out of those videos, like make different introversion, but they have to change with the environmental genetic goods. Their violations of the rights on exercise, you have the right to press the foundation of one side, giving them the right to educate way towards getting the house. Now wanting to arrange strong wills for disorder, and insecure medical records to know the supporters fighting as a distinction. The alternative is to affirm different step down and make that everything stays. This will break down that cycle of derivation. And now insecurity making people have family rights and participation, weapons of making love, demonstrating development, and making both males and ability. Desire for national insecure, imagining dialogue, you're not particularly telling them people on this issue, only reduce the most radical of like this term, but in terms of feels like that, like seems to be national security and possibilities. CMR, bouncing out of all the people sport plans are not mentioned to any. Further limits will generate multiple opposition is top on. And now embracing new forms like market state programs, the middle and terrible level of vortex and lava. And there are bunch of general whether he thinks squared much of getting the influence of social support because most multiple spots getting to maintain the building. Nuclear arsenal slash nuclear spots are studio level plans. They destroyed and there's no shortage of any possible amount of information. Clearly, discounting by military simulation between the psychotic receiving discounting relationship will take years to repair. And that's the against succeeding in military transformation in this dash. And 7 must be transformed to use one water or pin comics and I've been home, my British compound in the African sky. Only he managed to rebuild population with these civilian issues, so he says, well, he joined his British active power civilian list and all about that. Is a key, reform strategy will transform the military for irregular war fighting this layer. And now the budget now trying to get stretched from what's rapid to use most recently Vietnam country reloading to moving the military to mission games once and a lot of different productions, coming to plans to go to LCS and specialized needs. Programs are probably using this most collaboration that is key to all global conflicts, that's every impact is Bennett, and featuring his force mission and regular army push believe that and reconstruct that national equal biological form as well. Expand from the actions, let's say the same cause and military coverage and run settings for the students and regular right now. Studying also more time because it's the next one as some more stuff here like interesting knowledge more deeply and very cheap question. What would happen with weapons now? Caravan, yes, about the machine that help use kind of offer attacking target tax and direct assistant workers and maybe she's like one second today. Tax incentives for companies that create jobs in rural America and counterplay is critical to revitalize the United States economic benefits and resources to use global influences McDonald's. 7. You know that helping use kind of release on top of the really counts for increased cost of new investments trying to reduce workers enhance their competitiveness and financial access to capital spending before the use of home work about smarter for it. Or walking into place such thing in these facts and 31 use considered build on the benefit margin and increase that. Solve these internal longevity. This is their one I see often is paid. And not essential for various items work for long time, so different power stable for producing the future economic movement something like the labor side. The attorney village provides terms of limits on the national office of active using the Americas down to global and central economic foundations. Russia. There are insights both in all because every somebody is desires with certain national influences and growth evidence we want to see somebody be. Data information, that's good and use and everything. There's long time for the short evidence says Russia will try to natural capabilities, but will not. But it will take at least a decade to support when the B7s no. Accident launch in 2009, second one explosion both videos and second absorb the follow up the actions and not follow. Use the earliest pressures on the top presenting presumption be the preconceived pressure on these certain limit what things we use here 2000. Future science sorry, since more time again since you tell me that ancient subjects that are expected to force more rational. I mean the probability of anything accident capability yourself to include that control schedule commercial results more general less. Also say similar to play high before being treated by possible implementation of several orders to mark on 9. That is the all hand to influence this currently for order signals result because any influence position against us for people on human. The decision is repeatedly imposed history to yourself and examine which force on the action more return by other such you need to have the hypothesis. In addition, generally change far fetch no launch on a morning 4 days after the force not to see launch for the Germans use commercially by the option new force launch for credible as second trade force and even in the context of alternate relationship is fundamentally different goal work, but it's actually launch right away. And now I'm changes in the US force relationship in the US are not trying to say that for sets and also hoping for good vivid. Strategic partnership most cases involved in the organizational calculation to include much of the line. And establishing the White House and the no, return to Soviet style expansion is in this bar. And since the Georgia Kurds wasn't politician and accusing Russia of the Soviet expansion, all this is rolling around because both Cuba and Ireland to motivate to remodel the world like Marx, these something that Cuba's just well-fetched Russia on autocrat. The airlines are Cuban independence for short Russian distribution, graph on one side, the Russian leaders will have been talking about Russian baby men who outlooks and tires starting by the line of the ideas and more folks and others are Russian to line of people will be married. All that is about right Joe, and everything Russian pressure, Russian export on Soviet nations will agree. And Czechoslovakian Soviet nation works right on the in order to find social line in this world. Away from documenting Russian aggression is just posturing these cameras. And now Russians are wanting to increase the noise of Russian and people and those pushing down to approaching the directly both domestic and international offices and international affairs leading from He's already taken your following access comments today. The Northern High School of International Affairs time and having negotiated critical innovation within the course of the house makes yourself sound and sensible measures and instructions made and attempt to recruit with their military advantage. No U.S. first strike posture leaving for professor full of shit. This is Laura Floyd and says that's my leader president contains so many errors. The only replies watch part of the universe was to use the first of as you installing the MX and ideal worship in fact. The words from Max to be inside assaulting the identification group says there's no increase in yield and accuracy of the fact. Moderating the president is easy using between first strike to move the war. It's operating volume for companies moving so rose by acting the compromising this first sensing of the response of the summaries. It's retain the possibility to respond and there's no loss of merit from the U.S. Russian forces in Podvay. And six. To make a case, the Russian National Government determined the press forces to be numbers Germany starting with similar, and as the force of the similar direct the rest of the Russian forces squarely, conducting the action of the Russian forces to the country before reaching the loan in Russia, and China armed by using new promises are and despite this was not the Russian academy selecting a fixing the country from closely on either, it was by using promises and association of the league was not used to move closely in Russia, and China needing the return hegemony, well, not the last fight is all correct and not having this jockey, and not every day China is fighting in the 50s responding comments from the and having 70 parties from the speech both price counts and British academics. Here, China having the Bush did design some program around the second becomes those less than the country as has promised the end of the country's range versus any power man to the economic logic of the culture second big ball towards peace. The worst economic crisis in Great Britain and generally won't cause the economy disrupting because that's not. And no disease is Washington. The fact that Muslims can manage to start disease to 200,000 years to source of some drugs to come close to entire business by the natural selection pictures of them lethality and disease more likely to be threatened to promote. The largely good like the national name of the cause extinction was the never reason is improved that science is diabetes doesn't matter the suck off and suck off and that's it. Skeptics have shown violation explain why more than 10 million species of this novel. Now response to the science so it's not all about the species species clouds regarding the methodology of the core. The life sources and possible the number of species as a result of the activity of species of the season marks the number of species that become understand. There's those sources for 8,000 tests for there are only 150 years since they called no econ impact that most of the million company parts like research leaders they never run to the news coming in. Congress spotter a world of economic when it should take the one company rational to reduce how they non-flash change for it's more like development economic situations and multi-related kids also promises Canadian and those have American knowledge transfer like testifying where genetic information influence other nations have species greater large time done past wars most of the country influence Spanish strawberries the world yes playing similarly one even in the sun plays role and garden waters more generally multiple but not relation can be named opposite or working in constant disruption of the war or the world enjoys space in the American country and our short extension when it can reflecting kingdoms of Spanish states that when it can change shipping each couples may run a border between each other and one drive both domestic and public between impacts between the Arabian Israel and the developing more offshore balancing.
Alright, so the counterclaim conditional. Let's talk first about your Lieberman press. The Florida evidence indicates the Department of Defense released a report in response to the Lieberman press article. Their warrant for why we weren't pursuing a first strike policy was that we removed 4 submarines and voluntarily retired peacekeeping missions and accurate, powerful ICBMs. I'm curious why that would signal lessening of our first strike posture in the context of Cochrane evidence, which isn't in that piece of evidence, which says the target is the root of this policy.
I mean, we are not deploying our sort of nuclear systems as offensively as we did before. In addition to that, that piece of evidence used.
I mean, sure. Where does that evidence come from?
In addition to that, that piece of evidence uses those arguments as a warrant for not just the fact that we're stepping back, but why the Lieberman press evidence is factually incorrect because he makes arguments contrary to that in that argument.
The link to the politics disadvantage indicates that the president would need to make a painstaking effort to move over bureaucratic controls. If he spent capital on bureaucracy, why would the Congress necessarily be reflected in this capital?
Well, the reason why we only have to put a small threshold is because our Creamer evidence.
That's not my question. Why would bureaucracy capitalize?
It's sort of any diversion of Obama's focus has the ability to create political capital. No, it's political capital, but political capital entails a bunch of things, which include his focus, the amount of time. So the Congress needs to perceive that he's putting all of his political capital. Our Creamer evidence actually uses the phrase that every ounce of his political capital is being invested.
Yeah, I understand that. The political evidence, which is the interlink between healthcare and cap and trade, indicates that if a bipartisan healthcare bill spilled over to cap and trade in the past, the list is not bipartisanship in the past. It's just capital loss.
Our piece of evidence says that if healthcare passes, it would generate enough momentum in Congress to pass climate.
No, it says a bipartisan healthcare bill out of committee would lay the groundwork for similar compromise on climate. Yeah. Why does the plan upset that bipartisan?
Our piece of evidence says when it passes, that bipartisan piece of healthcare legislation,
healthcare could have significant
Democrats and
bill.
the floor. sure. It's not once it's something. Yeah, if it doesn't pass, if you can't access the internal it's not like a byproduct that causes partial pass.
What's the mechanism for the climate bill solving warming?
It provides mainly Copenhagen is sort of the one in the piece.
So I guess
I read from the beginning to this one.
Okay, and since it's Copenhagen, I guess you're saying it doesn't really matter which of the environmental proposals get proposed. It's just that we do something before that.
Environmental proposals?
Well, yeah,
In terms of
have a
Copenhagen?
specific. Are you saying there's a specific climate proposal like Bach is?
No. It's just a successful Copenhagen depends on international perception that the United States can theoretically get a successful climate bill in the future, and that's
Sorry,
dependent on
17
the
seconds. The last question about the CMR is that your acting evidence, which is the link to this, indicates that if Obama ignored his generals, then he would be tanked in civil military relations. You read a card in the one seat that indicates that the generals have spoken up.
Yeah, time.
Yeah, I think.
All right. So it's not an EA yet.
Okay, we're up.
948.
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sorry. Hey, there was a miscommunication in regards to cards that didn't read. Sorry if we sorted that out.
Just want to get those cards.
Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry.
What, are they jumping? They're jumping the paper.
Yeah. Exactly. That's the new school way.
Complaining about having
Paperless everything.
That's not.
Okay.
Okay, order it is. Top County. I agree. The Russia advance, privacy advance, Germany counter plan.
What was that?
The Edge counter plan, CMR, and Paul.
Russia, privacy, counter plan, critique, CNR,
Everybody good to go? Top County, we don't materially qualify the elimination of counterforce counter-interpretation substantially means illicit percent. So in 5, there is substantially false quality earlier girls here federal regulations 5 substantially almost immediately illicit we meet this plan. We moves one of the two major missions for nuclear first strike interpretation is better based on points, it's not arbitrary there. Given about material qualification, it's impossible to find there's no interpretation of material qualification would be argument sensitive there, argument sensitive federal law, and it's indefinable professional means this, and that's a better bright line which looks there, limits and predictable arguments for any ground. Additionally, we remove an entire mission of the United States nuclear officer arguments, we should remove all missions to be different from all these missions today, which makes it infinitely hard to reaffirm. It's also hard to get into the GSU because the judges allow the sense of generics, which reason you should be further reasonability if we defend if they think a reasonable ground is good enough. Now, Russia. Top debate. None of these arguments really raise with the thesis of our arguments. They conceded that the Russian posture is high. That the Volsinian first evidence. They conceded our Schwartz evidence does that the anti-sub activity in the United States waters means the United States is really attempt to pursue counterforce because it doesn't. No, what Russia is in pursue. We have the evidence inside the Pentagon, which is in the dark. Evidence they conceded the corporate evidence. All they have this length defense. They don't have any interest in rolling back the U.S. Russian border will lead to extinction. Our corporate evidence says that it would escalate quickly. They say that there's several alternate causes. Those are bring arguments for those are bring arguments. Some of those things would be able to trigger flashpoint after labor press evidence. This is the broader framework of counterforce. We would be able to trigger things. The next arguments they make about accidental launch and whatever else I have written here is all short-term arguments. They say there's no accidental launch does not the advantage that we're reading around the living answer to the argument we read. And the last way doesn't answer this one argument is that Russia will provoke the United States and that the United States will launch counterforce would be to give the United States does not accidentally launch, it deliberately launch, which also makes sense the next argument launch on morning stop. That we would perceive that the Russians were attempting to attack us in a nuclear first strike rather than a nuclear first strike would enable us to deter Russian conventional attacks within the United States waters, which also answers there. Next argument, additionally, accidental launches is something to be deliberately triggered from the inside over in 5 years are essential of the national security for numerous cases where high trust individuals should against their some have targeting and threats against inside the more targeting the worst inside threat inside can be particularly evaluated as an action sparking a nuclear conflict. They say they'll next argument. Dave, what's this next argument?
I don't know.
Okay, they say that there's no silence. They say there's no silence present. Only increases the likelihood that they would target the United States. That they would target the United States. If they don't go to silence, that means that we would all go to stuff to say that it's all posturing. We have the only evidence to describe Russian intentions. Or evidence says it's designed to provoke a response from the United States or NPR evidence that cites the Pentagon. What the Pentagon will respond to these issues or sports evidence that lead to war. The primacy advantage. They say that we wouldn't first strike. There's evidence says that it's not likely to have no interest. That's our number. First, which is that the number of amount of nuclear weapons that we have is only available here for first strike. It has no other purpose. The second, which is that it's perceived by Russia and China, which is all we need to win. Or internally here if they're wrong. They say that it's not designed to. They say they won't be able to achieve parity. That's why they're attempting to proceed. They are attempting to pursue rapidly in the status quo because they are so far behind. They say that they would never actually use the only recent evidence in this question. We agree the only recent evidence in this question whether they're modernizing or precedents is a drawing. With this status quo, they say that they're not threatened. They say not threatened. On the other hand, they say that it's unlikely to find that it's answering this economy argument. All concede argument. There's no economic collapse, which is the reason why those arguments are terminally important as well as the counterplan. They say that it wouldn't destroy the states. Since 2005, it doesn't decide the recent emergence of H1N1, which are evidence which cites the head of the enemy shows that the cause of extinction. The argument about diversity doesn't matter. It's an argument all conceded. It takes out a large risk. If you're climate impact, they say multipolarity wouldn't be able to solve. It's about reducing the likelihood of conceding unipolarity. Takes several threats for extinction. Inevitably must concede that it's tried or that. They say one thing and say that the economy behind it conceded a dozen other warrants that are taking theft for evidence capital. I don't know why you're here to counterfeit and solve hegemony with a YC. It's about why hegemony's got already conceded arguments that economic collapse will not happen, which is the reason why it would never terminally threaten hegemony. It's also conceded the arguments that hegemony and primacy are not the same thing. Being the biggest international actor does not mean that you can do what you want on the international stage. It means that everyone says all hegemony, there's not an impact turn that they're able to access. If they read impact turns in the block, it obviously excludes the conspiracy strategy. We should get new answers to this argument the way I have to do.
Oh, it's permutation.
No, it's that way with research. We don't want to just counterfeit and solve such. Well, whatever, permutation. Critique. Existence comes first, postulate two, existence versus distinct from jurors, so much external capital trial, and there's opportunity more for air filling, practical presence required, or such as maybe threats and willingness to take action to bear the cost we take into account of future information harmed by external risk and what no fact refer to when I see specific scenarios arguing that we balance and equal to avoiding the futures of inevitable claim. It doesn't answer any arguments. There are also dumb either the representations are here and the other arguments or links or representations aren't key. Representations of prior constructed soul frame or journal advocacies, competitive equity, man's permutations, the view the case solves and the alternative doesn't risk more than nor behind. The strange like a horrible sense of the threats and to which project attacks were going to have this return severe dangerous and I say what the opportunity involved due to the government interests contributing to research the system which comes to terms about what they must have used multiple threats are going to be possible change that well. One place starts subject investigation could numbers of happens to be another ones eventually. Round one, they reproduce hierarchies and exclusion. 15 and 6 trying to escape the logic of politics to the sense of sovereignty. This is a system included with the position that in fact only has never escaped the political only reproducing logic of exclusion and authorities to be so excluded that hierarchy is straight from the internal project to pleasure and recognition for society that there is otherwise a mode of difference to be eliminated or ideally. The norms of the universe principles with the first science and recognition way to be exclusion and hierarchy from the planet and the expectations designation certain effects exclusive because of word by assuming positions always done about such exclusion. That will only be disputed. Initially, the rational evidence is double term. We don't tend to create a global liberal humanist framework for anything. There are alternative creates that framework, which is the reason why you should reject it. Initially, there's no impact, security, skill, loader, and loader, inside of the danger, the city officials on the mind, resident the security, those who are structured, they may not have some fatal, which is a form of tolerance, potential action, and rather, we have received points of the front to the state, and the concern of the likelihood of security, the conditions, security, is all good, and the importance of these that security possible, stress of the wild danger state, this can be addressed with some of the possible points that I need to use present firm, tell me that every increase that has remains viable on permutation, do build the permutation, do build the doesn't specify whether that's a plan, if they specify that, and they'll build one wish to get the response to CMAR. No linking. First off, they've conceded evidence from Shilton, which has the headless track that says that they would readily accept amendments to counterforce evidence to generic nuclear compromises. Their argument that reform people solve. And no internally they've conceded that there are some prices on the specified inherited CMR as law and under 9 agents are, especially if you find inspiring gates that make decisions that can be affected this year, like the city of Ireland, the deal is inevitable, and presidential leadership, and you check on physical philosophical counts divide. The two bureaucracies also Afghanistan, Afghan forces have report of Afghanistan like a string relation to the bomb of the military strain, and silver intuition last night, the last time the duration of the U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan, the office will have to not both the U.S. mission in Afghanistan for silver military relations, which lead references about individual conflicts. We wait the plan makes people war is inevitable. There's no individual conflict to be likely to escalate the same magnitude, Iraq, budget priorities, and social matters all true. CMR is low economy, and then a single secretary of defense is the inner office, trusting the office of the faithful loose private other side for problems particular. Once in 5 in the Iraq is the military to decide 2004 establishment of social issues. If the military need the most immediate, initially, the military wouldn't back out Western states. The military is not a trustworthy the ability to make decisions about whether the U.S. should attack the first of the political decision on reasonable discuss the approach meeting out into some parts of QDR. The assessment and the current first because that's what has worked with healthcare. It's not in terms of logical policy that could do the plan, it could do the plan and pass on. Additionally, healthcare will have to be on so it's already 920 euros expected to the computer just one with low compensation or studying with the object for the one, the other thing is the reasonability to pass the bill would be a serious question. Climate bill won't pass as a financial regulation. COVID-19
Obama and Congress and financial regulations, proper greenhouse gas limits, how climate has some information in the legislature for Obama secretary to lead. As years and ever since the time, so consumer practices and Smith started this character proposal arguments in the financial regulation involved in death and arguments the health security jurisdictional battles by climate during the 9/11 bodies is in direct conflict with the Auction Research Committee has control over trade boxes shows IPP has boxes and West reliable additionally turn capital Obama associated with player generates lines and 9 Obama is moving the nuclear arsenal which comes to the dealing with health care and financial regulatory climate Obama so we will have to start so something preparing to part of foreign agreement and reduce money for weapons we give souls for also copper and health and substance director the CIS here's a poll that proves this time under Gallery should deliver free cooperation of foreign to the Canadian drug and several political leaders who could choose to develop our investigation readily though public approval despite the resistance of my counter and their security bureaucracy winners when Mitch 1-9 political capital the shelf like violence that's physical capital like economic nuclear cells clear Obama with use of capital now is the time to use Obama to be judged by what they have accomplished last night they haven't had rules of little not the challenge therefore the way they can get new political capital to converting to purple about the concrete legislative machine it's finished by partisan dollar low 9 to President Obama former Secretary of State former Secretary of Defense Obama became trusted person for our partisan existence the president have opportunity to make elimination of great much must establish as official policy for the first years nuclear force there's no link unique to Obama has made several other true supports the NPR in this as well supporting the CPPT edition of the NPR against Obama political Congress and no 9 once the NPR is complete Obama has political coverage negotiated required or to expand moving forward to this American African general Swiss take the first step F-22 is true that the food resource with tons of capital nuclear she's larger in line the gravity of the F-22 proceeding by services Obama used substantially capital high by 22 productive turning the veto any of those sanctions include money for new plans so they would evaluate global climate models all and 7 implement associated with national security policy research and model lead time for attraction for future ways of policy and some variables to be very to be selecting what's figured out will review predicting kind of 25 for if 50 or 100 years in the future additionally they have no evidence that they'll be able to resolve current threats of climate means that even if they can address it it's massively long term there's no time frame for ever wondering what kills the pain comes much faster additionally the terms also linked push and spin not shocking 9 president while the nuclear should put some rocks to work also pursuing his nuclear policy preference to the rocks 6 thumb the White House when Johnson Thomas and gave me calls and agencies follows additionally here's more evidence of warming will cause extinction you don't solve this and 7 climate change well everyone understand that the world doesn't have any potential we have to deal with full scale climate change no longer completely prevent climate change actually no I'm going to read this next one. The next one additionally it's inevitable that here in 5 2 report published in the journal of science form that global warming continues to be stopping the wind full right away the thermal initiative estates of continue developing those water takes longer to heat and global years more than not be stopping emissions of greenhouse gas plants to the point of turn away global warming associated catastrophes.
How is global warming inevitable and climate models also not true?
Well, the evidence says that under the assumption that those climate models are correct, the rate of damage that humans have inflicted is so severe that no action we take now is enough to reverse it.
You read a couple parts reading the healthcare bill not going to pass the status quo. Do you read a piece of evidence that isn't talking about the caucus bill?
We read pieces of evidence that talk about the ability of any bill to get through the committee. Our evidence speaks to division, and although that division is somewhat inspired by the box bill, and perhaps our evidence is written against the context, our evidence says other bills will not have success either, because there will continue to be
If those divisions are created by details in the caucus bill, why does that mean that other forms of the bill, that other people that don't have those details will
because that assumes that the reverse causal argument is true, that another bill would be better. Our evidence says it would not. For example, our evidence cites the numerous fights that are taking place between centrists and liberal Democrats, not only over things like the Baucus bill and things like the public option, but also over key details like state funding.
You read climate won't pass. Does it assume a world in which healthcare passes?
Yes, it does. It says that financial regulation will precede climate. So if there is a fight in between healthcare and climate, it'll be over financial.
Well, we say healthcare will lead to agenda success in general. So does your piece have to say financial regulation will pass, climate won't pass?
It says that there will be an incredibly large fight over financial regulation that will substantially diminish the prospects of climate. Our evidence says that, yeah, even if you're right, the agenda is still going to be a huge fight, and you'll have to use that
healthcare boosts his agenda, but financial regulation puts it back down to zero?
Well, it says it'll be a big fight. If he gets just enough with healthcare to pass the plan, if you're right, and there really is a link threshold for your disad, and the political capital scenario is close, it will be clearly triggered by financial regulation.
Do you read a piece of evidence that the plan is a win?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which piece of evidence is that?
Digital evidence.
What's the warrant for?
The warrant says that the way political capital works for the Obama administration right now is that he's facing a new barrage of negative advertisements that he can't reflect in time. His best bet is to get new wins to counteract the negative proposal.
That's winners win. I'm saying, do you have a piece of evidence that the plan is a win? Our leak story is sophisticated to the point where it says that healthcare is the only thing that can be a win in the status quo because Obama has invested all of his political capital.
Sure.
Other random pieces of legislation wouldn't be wins for Obama because it looks like he's not focusing on healthcare. What piece of evidence do you read that says plan will be perceived as a win?
Well, I'm very impressed with the sophistication of your healthcare. We read a specific study by Steinbrenner and Gallagher that cites not only decades of public opinion research, but also recent models. Our evidence cites a poll as what would happen with Obama in the context of nuclear weaponry. Your spin about a piece of agenda link is not nearly as persuasive.
So your whole evidence says on nuclear issues about can gain capital?
Well, specifically on issues where he retracts United States aggressivity in a way that helps preserve United States financial capital. For example, telling people I stopped spending billions of dollars on first strike weapons that we'll never ever use is probably a pretty effective way for him to tell the American people that he's cutting down on.
All right.
919.
What was that? You didn't extend by you.
Did not extend by me, did not extend me time, take over.
Nine.
I see that comment from one issue that says the draft complex is for
So, why you all have it?
Actually, it's last.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Go ahead, somebody say order.
I'm ready to shot. It's sort of like a Twitter feed.
Okay. The order is the Russian bid, followed up by the primacy bid, then the CMR bid, and then the
Russia, primacy, CMR.
We do have terminal effect increase our equivalent evidence based on our fifth and another student says that if you put yourself in the position of the person who actually has a finger on the nuclear weapon, there's a unique psychological pressure not to make the decision to use nuclear weapons. None of their evidence is all theoretical. It says, oh, the U.S. might make a counter-force nuclear strike made an unintentional test. Our equivalent evidence says to use. These people do not understand what it actually means to be in the position of power. It is a huge decision to put yourself to use nuclear strike. They're looking for any incentive not to escalate conflict because there's incentive for conflict de-escalation. Also, our grant evidence says that even if a crisis brought to Russia, are strong incentives to avoid an active unauthorized launch of political relations, economic independence, and security. Our Russian arsenal all make threat of a Russian strike forward, U.S. strike on zero, and Russian land, even a rapid U.S. force forward to end peace negotiation before nuclear launch. Russian generals concede shot 7 after the local conflict, rapid general communication, possibly acceptable to some place. Then although say the second term was warning to the U.S. continuation of national security retaliation nuclear arsenals off the warning negotiations. In two motion now, let's start getting our IX and our equivalent answers. The internal arguments, even if Russia provokes us, we would have every incentive not to actually retaliate with nuclear weapons, especially if there's provoking us things like conventional subs, etc. Also, their evidence concedes that in order for us to provoke us, it will take it at least a decade for them to develop those capabilities. All of their evidence describes the minor things including status quo. None of that says sufficient to actually trigger a strike. All of those cards describe the status quo, just say that it offsets depending on the standard equivalent to a U.S.-Russian nuclear war. The threshold for that to be especially high given the equivalent evidence now. The acid launch argument does take it out of Ford evidence indicates they have a survivable second strike option, a hardened silos. It means they don't have incentive to launch first, even if the United States has counter-strike option, even if the United States has counter-force options, it's not sufficient to take out Russia, which answers their privacy argument because they're not incentive to escalate at hardened Russian targets, meaning that they won't launch a warning 48. In recent years, Russia seems to the increased overall lifespan of weapons by no means the United States after operation over the launch of warning costs, special class of ice cream, missiles, hardens, typically down. The U.S. practice for peace and photography, effective leadership, at least a small ICBM force for Russian mobile ice cream, responsible for the option of riding out attack. They say their evidence indicates Russian intent to start to focus. Their evidence doesn't go a step further to say that propagation will be sufficient to trigger more. They have 3 pieces of evidence which could make this claim. I'll answer each of them. The first piece of sports evidence has 0 warrants. It just says a more than a half century being less nuclear danger. So as anything in these steps can cause crisis escalation, our equivalent evidence answers that explicitly says if anything a half century proves that nothing can trigger crisis if it will actually trigger new warrants. We've been through multiple crises that and committing a suicidal attack. Their sports evidence also concedes it will take at least a decade for Russia to counter threat our capabilities. Their classroom federal evidence again is a one sentence hypothetical. It says counter-force options could increase the probability of would unnecessarily escalate conventional conflict. Our equivalent evidence says that you would not put yourself in the mind of a U.S. policymaker. We wouldn't just unintentionally use a nuclear weapon because we were feeling like the threshold for a war should be higher than that. The last piece of evidence, the Cochrane evidence, the only thing it says is that Russia could have an unauthorized attack. Our equivalent evidence explicitly answers that, says that even if a crazy Russian general launched off a nuclear weapon, the United States would not want that to go to a full nuclear war because that is suicidal. We had to best retaliate with one nuclear weapon for an eye for an eye, and there's no risk
access to nuclear weapons. Russia takes 3 Russian people working nuclear weapons of low term rates are well paid, unlike much Russian armed forces, those security weapons continue to live in close cities with assured management secretly advice that costs 25%. Privacy. There is no privacy now to win these arguments. It takes out control into both of their advantages. Their evidence indicates to sell it in racks, their sports evidence to take, and these 10 years to get to that point. Also, their government's willing to deliver the more public evidence in case they overstate the flying Russian forces. There is still parity between the United States and Russia. We don't have the ability to have counterstrike. Even if they win, we have the capability for counter force options. Our sound evidence indicates that Russia and China are not threatened. The nuclear taboo means that they know the United States isn't just going to start a nuclear first strike out of nowhere. This will lead to massive international backlash, and the fact that they have minimum deterrence should be sufficient. Even if they could launch off 1 nuclear weapon to destroy Washington, that should be sufficient because Washington, the United States is not going to take a risk that results in hundreds of millions of American citizens dying from 1 nuclear attack. It means that even if minimum deterrence solves a U.S. grand strategy, just like Russia, China, Sour South, Russia, China is not going to be respected for the same reason. They have now chosen to balance against the U.S. century statute of capital, military interests, 5 responsibility, military powers, and minimum deterrence means Russia and China will feel vulnerable. Sour 7, and extremely unlikely that the U.S. nuclear weapons against Russia, China, both the country could with 1, 5, 10, or 100 weapons. Does not really matter. 1 active weapons division, 7 trade force, hard to imagine, and attack against vital U.S. interests, directing routes of the rest of the certain response to choice of retaliation, by which U.S. doesn't minimum deterrence against Russia, China. Need not worry about the exact U.S. nuclear posture and the nuclear taboo defense U.S. first strike, Sour 7, retribution, weapons sounds hollow. It's not like the U.S. will use nuclear weapons to conflict no military rationale exists. Given some of the anomalies from the last decades, the taboo is only strengthened, and minimum deterrence prevents Word 7 bolt out to attack remain unlikely because the remote possible retaliation likely to turn all of the most risk-accepting tools U.S. policymakers not. When so let's be informed, they test the fact that turning Russian nuclear posture creates a higher probability of launch first strike, and the nuclear accidents arguments also all the defense, the clean evidence, the forward evidence, all the other advantage indicates there's not controlling to the launch of one scenario, and there's nonsense escalate now, and Germany sustained more job evidence indicates empirically that there have been alarmist predictions forever, but they never come true because Germany is resilient, always managed to adapt to the situation. More evidence that Germany will collapse because the economy is job 9. In all instances of climate economic there were services that the current control should be economy worth 3 times more than the economy never before have all the gas and cars, so why military Russia, China, all the times both different is less than 1 7 5 North and the car, both US and China, India, Japan, Russia, and India, put together the fact that they before 8,000 miles towards the US twice in Iraq and once in Afghanistan, if Germany is sustainable, there's not a joint end or conflict because all of their impact evidence assumes that there's a world of multipolarity, and thus the United States needs to cooperate with other states if there's a stable unitary development to link to it. Now the only argument going forward is disease impact argument makes a structural claim, so it doesn't matter whether or not there's a date. It says that the disease will either mutate too fast or too slow, which means there's not a way to cause extinction. If it was actually that virulent, it would burn out quickly. More evidence, no extinction of viruses, but too quickly burns itself out. The Guardian 3, Ebola virus is so virulent, kills up 90% of affected those within 1 or 2 weeks. So how come the entire population hasn't dropped dead for hemorrhage and shock or failure, or even just too deadly, kills too quickly as to shorten incubation periods of pool infected people doesn't grow. The biodiversity takeout warming impacts without changing the overall climate, so it turns the Earth's atmosphere into Mars and causes mass escalation chance. We have multiple impacts out. Our non-specific biodiversity events a small level defense. Now, CMR. Any version of our regular warfare impact outweighs the current of 8 magnitude collapse states like Pakistan and Mexico cause regional wars that draw on the United States and great powers that escalate to include nuclear and chemical biological weapons, which nothing does soon be as probability are against the level of percent about what types of wars are the most likely in the future. Great power nuclear wars are not likely, but a smaller scale conflict is what happens because we need to control the escalation of those conflicts. The order impacts on our bad evidence and regular warfare is by containing future global conflicts, risk of escalation of war. Existing Pakistan, Central Asia, the Middle East, and says all of these can involve nuclear, biological, chemical weapons, also expands global terrorism, threatens the economy, regular warfare, capability to attain all possible conflicts, but the danger to end escalation, war, possibility of war, is philosophy 98. Central Asia, the Galaxy is right for flash points, like several drawings, wrong, several present, nuclear thunder, present, turn, global, scramble, cluster, conflict, image, geopolitical players, challenge, is keeping conflicts going without setting global blaze, and Pakistan conflict, risk, global war, breaks one, Pakistan, anything taken over, special person, doesn't keep weapons, and banging, military treasures, the engine, not saying, identify, manufacturing, float, nuclear, and self-bound, US military protection, 25 war games, each for sold, nuclear war, if the government developed possible guns, relevant to US, might also fuel, when nighters, advanced, machine, defense, both oil, and nuclear, assigned towards the summer of 1914, secret defense, cascading series, international incest, modern control, and led of World War I. The first argument, they say Stratcom is accepting it now. This part literally says nothing on this question. Pepsi challenge call for it after debate. It just says that Obama proposed it now, and it says Chilton doesn't think we're on here trigger alert. It says nothing about whether or not accepted, and more like evidence changing targeting strategy will engender safe military resistance. No, it's not. The proxy reviews the question targets and strategy, reducing targets, provide transition framework power for constituencies through outcome rather than seeing things they are rather than change the kind of proposals here, threatening entrenched interests. Certainly, the resistance to Obama's proposals also are evidence indicates that before the NPR, any change to nuclear policy would be sufficient to trigger massive resistance. More of the playing factors to change the doctrine in advance of the NPR, the military just the conclusion, which means they'd be pissed off if we cannot deny. The lack of consensus thinking barriers capacity and the pursuit of questions just within the view of some of our principles express that some potential changes. And is that production, which we really said there's a little bit of use by recommendations just to limit our suspicion for retaliating for a nuclear strike. Now, the first argument, they say crisis flow and status quo. Arguments assumes it says that even though there's conflicts in the NPR, Obama was waiting and consulting with the military, so they're ultimately not going to bid to us off the plane. Happens immediately. It means they're going to trigger conflict and indicates the current negotiations are going to well, even though there's some tension are specifically given in case of changing targeting practices that with state resistance means for question and Obama's waiting for nuclear posture review before committee. Before committing to the correction check 9, Obama's pressing heavily top about review directed 2 weapons, see how much structural trade for further 2 weapons, no arsenal power for constituencies, and then the police have to see if there's specific how fast the deep tracks by the addition Charles Big Bump was under you. And they say the Afghanistan argument, the evidence might be affordably good, but it's just rhetoric. There's no reason to McChrystal resist support contrary to Obama's recommendations will undermine relations. Or just that there's the opposite question is whether or not the civilians have credibility with the military, not whether or not the military has credibility with the civilians. And their evidence doesn't apply. Just using the phrase CMR isn't good enough. The Bible literally about how many controversial subjects be imposed on the military doesn't matter. The military does not even know Obama. What matters is the other direction. And Obama's consulting general for the Afghanistan to make him listen to McChrystal report found on Obama said that we know which is the McChrystal report assessment before Obama. From the process and how to proceed, he said he must consult widely before starting with the generals. And the new fight of nuclear weapons will magnify the conflicts over Afghanistan. Proves only as much bigger than the argument order 920 Obama is against the existing huge industry for over $54 billion spent annually on weapons lots, country lots, jobs, right, lots, battle, budget, typical time for Obama and ruling British government with Pentagon 640 in a fight of troop points around Afghanistan. And Obama will cave down on the McChrystal report will consider civil military tensions involved, but Obama won't fight the military. Fever 921. Obama seems to be the White House slow response to the Obama's leading force projecting additional force to lead his part of Obama's projecting McChrystal was for additional troops, Obama's authority to one kind of military leaders, but it's very difficult thing for him to do. Their next piece of evidence says that the Iraq and the bunch of our code evidence assumes that it's from later the article says that even though there's tension over those issues, it will not be sufficient to collapse military relations and civil military relations or prove despite underlying tensions. Such time for continuing issues to make the relationship between the U.S. military and Obama. Tensions between the U.S. and Iraq and Afghanistan are growing mismatch between defense spending and federal budget transformations, armed forces, and polarizing social relations like home sections of the military without a relationship from Obama, filters, and the breakdown relationship, defense, message from both senior military leadership and Obama, equal peace, self-power relationship, the active last 16 years of Obama, and the military leadership so far taking positive steps to field civil military love. The last piece of evidence doesn't have to link to this, that it says that the military would be pissed. They just wouldn't roll back the plan and refuse to implement Obama's proposals, not going for a rollback argument, but their arguments concedes there will still be resistance.
I'm sorry, one quick question. What were the impact evidence here at the top of this Pakistan, Middle East?
Pakistan and Central Asia. I'll actually take a second.
Yeah, that's not.
Okay, so you used about 20 seconds there.
Who is the controlling actor within the military that Obama is trying to appease or would not fight?
If he wouldn't fight?
Yeah.
Well, in the context of Afghanistan, evidence says he won't fight McChrystal.
Okay.
I don't really understand what other context you'd be asking.
Sure, you say that he won't restrain the military, or that it's a question of how the civilians interact with the military. I'm just curious which officials. Weird evidence on Chilton. You say that evidence is relevant. If it's not Chilton, I'm guessing it's McChrystal.
The reason that your evidence is relevant is because it doesn't say that Chilton is down with the plan.
Okay,
Like,
our evidence says
challenge, they can call up the card.
Okay, let's talk about what the evidence says. The evidence says that Obama said U.S. forces are on no trigger alert. Chilton said that's absolutely false. It's a mischaracterization of U.S. armed forces. They have differences over targeting posture.
What does that have to do with targeting?
What's that?
I guess I missed that.
They have differences over the question of what the alert forces of U.S. structures are. You read evidence that says that he's coordinating with the military.
Now you're like a factual question. They disagree about whether or not they're on parachute or alert. That is not, they're fighting. There's a disruption in relations. It's like,
I'm asking if you have any uniqueness that says they're united on counterforce, air trigger alert, or posture.
We have evidence that they're united in terms of the issues of uniqueness for our dissident. We have evidence that there are some tensions in relations, but that there's not a collapse.
Okay, what is the threshold between the tensions that exist now and things like Iraq, DAT, Afghanistan, all the other things that there have been fights over, and the plan, which removes a first strike option we haven't used, never really have used, and never really considered using for 2 decades?
A few things. First is that our code evidence says that Obama is making conciliatory gestures on those other things. He'll defer to what they have to say on Afghanistan. He's not going to push DAT. He'll defer to what they have to say on Iraq. Your plan fiats that he does not defer on this issue. Our Norris evidence indicates that there's intense opposition within those military bureaucracies.
Makes total sense. You read evidence that says that the threshold you need to win for this argument isn't that high for the NPR because the NPR makes the political climate very intense. What constitutes a major change in terms of the NPR? What things would it set?
Our Norris evidence says that a change in targeting policy would be a major change, that there would be intense opposition.
Okay, and your evidence, does it make a prescriptive claim that there will be no major changes to U.S. operations or just no changes to targeting?
Well, regardless of whether or not there are changes, those changes are made in consultation, in coordination through the process of the NPR. What happens before that, which is unique.
Okay, so that goes back, okay, then that's maybe a better way to ask the question I started the cross-ex with. Who is he consulting with in the context of the NPR? Which military actors? Has that authority? Obviously, not all of them get a zero. Which ones do?
I'm not entirely sure exactly which people are involved in the NPR, but I think our code evidence says that it's basically like the head of Stratcom,
So Chilton,
obviously,
Gates, who's the head of the military,
Yes.
and Crystal, who's making this report.
Sure.
Okay, and those are the three major actors.
I mean, those are three major
I
actors.
realize
I won't say
it's
it's
I could use the rest real quick, just read it.
that particular terminology.
Yeah. Anybody else have anything? Drink water?
Go after the next. I want to hear you later in the debate saying after that.
That's pretty much all. I was gonna say but making you take it just 6 minutes.
The order is K, counter plan, politics.
Not going for its initial premise, suggesting as competition goes like navigating to further moving party now. The counterplay fairness says two, the counterplay development says that it solves the best aspects of democracy, solves the international corporation things, Germany access to the best parts of Germany by expanding, economic cooperation and integration solves the return to permutation, links to politics, no argument, we see by the counterplay links rejected, it's vague, just, permutation, we see allows shift to the voting issue politics. Runaway publication, we pass the presentation, pull up positive feedback, about our melting ocean absorbing the heat quickly, making work best people evidence initially that outweighs mutual water solving, and 7 common sense reaction, I've never had a sense so we expect from her additional going high cost when that's the point here. Risk function, goal function, never which part of the worst things, never this looks more like high level, high cost when and causes me for it, 7 question, function, issue, we will see our search challenges to these stations. Look, we have a very rich sense of result migration change, that comes from us, and our computation research unlikely, and likely, and as much possible, and passage to help more safe agenda that solves the absolute literally, do it if you can, this one world, and then tell about expressing tools, and never reduce convention, and all the weapons, and all research, and all the weapons, and you work with Russian reduce our stockpile, and then switch to the way I would do it, and the action express, this form of observation, line by line, first, reject our reject communication, kills the second round, we get it, stop, play, makes next couple, this is a bunch of various now, the unique is international, once you need it, one into unique, sense by long, that means you will garner, and that's what that's built down, is not inclusive, just as if there's also student in all of the just assumes boxes built, but the box lines, they'll all occurs, well, create a new one that applies to Lumen, and that comes fast, help all the different emotions, my box, all the it's one thing much more similar to the hospital, when the governments are going to get around before this no, it's more like the I joined the Democrats here, that the political capital will be the deal maker, this is Orange United 5, and see what Richard Shot 7, health program, so regardless issue, more favorite, the intervention by the house, is that health rate, investment, health system, reform will become law, and some improvement by the president's approach are, one is to claim represents against the Democrats are being important, successful, while the capital and GP, and hopefully opposition is dying off, and Obama's will Congress, Washington Post 9, and 13 Obama, human healthcare, he really got helping, guys, lead, compromise, the cost savings, down will agree, this is AP, and 960 miles per chance, on campus, and second one, first week, and in terms of the second one, allowing healthcare to be some vote, yes or no vote, but then the first one to be sure which party to be one of them fundamentally only a simple majority vote, 80% support the squash blows, and that's actually voluntary for people to how we are now close to mentioning about 80% in the House of Senate, and he's just kind of one task with Obama, winning on healthcare is key, so it is spreading momentum for farmers, pretty strong political parties, specifically with Obama, the capital of the people who are ready to give the P is success on healthcare solves and a signal that Obama's not a control public key to successful company. We don't have to win past just the perception that healthcare is single pass and generational capital for Obama's AP 93 practical double is simple efficient to generate this political capital for the failing consumer capital for the women so that's for agenda. John has like the unlock your item as judges and he says winners will group the three cards thinking about this in terms of winners losers makes sense. Obama's got all and on healthcare is why get 9 Obama's got healthcare for you send the folks on to be huge LED says never accept options says before but it's never adequately all their evidence to their six Obama introduced a piece of legislation through the natural process not the way they randomly introduced a piece of legislation and nothing else matters is making break for healthcare at MIT in the United States. Obama research related healthcare may more to make everything more because he'll have an intersection where he must report to become related risk. Criminal president law of healthcare affecting more than 107 getting healthcare bill problems in cases. First explanation of management of the picture because it's more capital for every plan. Well, what is specifically to add to the agenda that's used today? And now it's like a lot of stuff about how there's much education that people that are health dominated about it. It's more one which we don't see watching it. And only one big thing that's not much better is you tackle something that's so important to everything else goes in person now. Bipartisan rally is all about capital focus. Because all of these focus on health and well, and fights about the arsenal to enter after healthcare to MIT. And that government is our special term executive branch government make one better placing the shape arsenal for the tackling. The extraordinarily complicated thing times our tax forces and missions and such individual also trying to all the health system there. Address both current chiefs of late is not unique. He hasn't done he hasn't done shit like planning. He has all the capital of they have a view. He has used some not that he has zero capital or it doesn't apply to discussing our links here, which follows going to run the MPR. It's not part of the cover our evidence specific the ones to be the link evidence in case. There would be huge bureaucratic battle from Obama, which we all his focus that he's currently investing on healthcare with would be trying to refer to one in case that every ounce of this capital has to be spent on healthcare in order for it to succeed. It's F22% so all and on healthcare accessible. That's all we have to say right about this. Why? Obama has been capital investing in healthcare and he now the more impact he modeling is acting as public Senate. Comments is some situation related to non-US housing fund answers various non-parts to the labor. Any question on the United States for national force and explain more with others. He do something including factors in our single outage from the one and see some top-down model of something very environmental indicators for the warming occurring. That's what means that is proof that warming is occurring now. The impact is quick 100 months of extinction is started weekly and anything just about time which can important one of the content of the game when some of the one side down the road disability or service for people or other factors in the threshold as well as the water continuing to solve in greenhouse gases. And we do solve it fast enough because our 3 minutes of anomalous question is why. A 2-degree rise from the section would be dangerous. Copenhagen is our last. The chance to save humanity we need because the international community has to act together and prevent us reaching to the point. And don't solve the link that's all about. That's why I asked you on climate to distract about space and warming. Because they stay safety is well, it's not inevitable. That's what we can solve. Copenhagen not to claim of and they cause investment in renewables to SWIFT. And the country first market contracts really president as we speak produce affordable energy use commission of incentive develop carbon mitigation of that world because that solves one of these jobs because they by the way publish percent much greater sinking less product and right back destroying the less market renewable energy revolution must replace the country with renewable energy coming in is key to Copenhagen which solves this MIT and I think like for Copenhagen concept of fuel and bond wealth energy the US Constitution need basic regulation and delegation to make term the next paradigm for approval stage negotiations and US actions key to say key and I think that's not critical commission on the goal of the requirements emissions.
9:48. Are you going to take part in the comments? Yeah. Do you have the time? Are you saying that?
The thing is, I really want to be doing that stuff, but before that's no, if you remember, it's not in your message.
All right, everybody ready for Emory? It's going to be Russia, primacy, the counterclaim, CMR, politics.
Russian pharmacy counterclaim.
That's the copy.
Oh, thank you. These are really good.
Thank you for doing that. Keep my parchment.
Now, just about twice on this advantage. The first set is about a U.S. launch, not a Russian launch of nuclear missiles. We would miscalculate, leading to an extreme conflict. We've also conceded an add-on. That's a choice. Cochrane evidence indicates that it would be an independent extinction scenario because of people would be able to be moles within the U.S. nuclear doctrines means that they launch an attack out of their own perspective. Their psychology arguments don't assume this. It would be an increased person when they've already conceded that these evidence warrants as how many people in the United States program would be able to access the technology. It's only for propensity for CMR conflict going nuclear when a military actor just flips a switch means that our mole solves any of your internal links. The short evidence indicates that there's a high likelihood of miscalculation even if modernization is slow. That's the reason why the strikes now they will strike us now we will strike them now while they were weak. Additionally, miscalculations to low risk of war arguments is safer readily leads to an irrational response. That's our safer evidence. Additionally, it's a perception-based argument. The decade of all the argument is only a rhetorical position from which our evidence cites as the foundation of counterforce. Additionally, second strikes isn't reliable for Russia. That's a labor and press evidence wouldn't launch a war. It's about also about the U.S. attacking them. Prefer escalation argument cites historical precedent evidence doesn't assume a sub-positioning, which is recently evident, doesn't include an unintentional loss as well. The primacy advantage. Their tangent primacy now argument says that it is an instigation of primacy. You should prefer our independent evidence, which indicates the collapse is inevitable. Your econ warrants are relevant. We have conceded your econ defense means that there's no collapse ever. Their perception is only relevant internally as long as the nations feel it is possible that we could attack them. They would be willing to prevent decapitating strikes as marker and Cochrane. Additionally, none of the rationality offense assumes this calculation member indicates the first strike makes all of the possible hedge isn't sustainable if ever paid of an accident above. Answering all of your warrants that indicates that the collapse is inevitable due to mounting debt, which is not answered. And respect your econ warrants, we've conceded your econ defense that's above counterclaim. Clark evidence is conceded indicates engine enemy is a privacy. We're not going for the permutation. Reject the argument of the team says the competition A econ collapse doesn't happen. That's explained on the case CMR. Regional wars are less likely than miscalculation against Russia. That's our time here. That's our shock evidence. Control NCV control the time frame and probability questions. Reasons of organizations are assumed by your evidence in your structural reasons for why your low-level conflicts would escalate are empirically disproves and no particularly positive thing. Or your Pakistan scenario, your evidence doesn't assume Budo. There's no threshold for instability or modeling situation. Wars don't escalate. Why it's concerned about a great game or exaggerate the control for influence of the region does not challenge the international interests of China, Russia, or the U.S. will support an invasion country that centralized or security for the three great powers of reducing nuclear terrorism, shared existence of peaceful interests of reducing terrorism, geographic multiple level costs to centralization wars. 96. The greatest evidence of centralized security are internal the process of nation building, legitimacy, crisis, social and economic transformation, decolonization, landscape, democracy, war disputes, and a of other issues that are sort of instability, post-Soviet republics. Initially, cops of CMR versus decline of consultating means that the consultation that the union gets up and talks about means that even if the plan upsets them, they would fall back and line up to defend us or shop for evidence. The consultative process would also be jacked from foreign policy. 951 key conception not going to be the revival of the RW. People so up for RW are going to be sadly disappointed. Tauscher told the people Tauscher played a key part in being by the RW. Republicans are shooting parties. Tauscher said the administration would hold affirm and instead of offering them a stockpile management. People were deeply concerned about their RW are going to think about stockpile management and extend prisoner evidence indicates that there is no specific uniqueness to the link. You should default to our strap on workers. So instead, you want to do it in the categories. There is no unity within the now. It's also conceded uniqueness arguments and our evidence that you can see by the CMR is low because of the NPR. To answer your arguments as to why they would be freaked out before the conversation even started. No link as to why the time for the is necessary. The Afghanistan arguments are having evidence indicates that even if you were to compromise, they are still initially pissed off means that there's no time for your immediate link arguments based upon perception. Additionally, our known evidence has the conceded warrant of DVT and other social priorities within the budget that do not explain any evidence in anything. The threshold for the consultation arguments over one link arguments. Additionally, the rest of the evidence is conceded indicates that even if they were initially disappointed, they would ultimately fall in line because they don't want to upset the command and control structure means there's no probability of their impact's good.
And they wouldn't advertise controversy. Other nations wouldn't perceive it.
They also wouldn't advertise controversy, and other nations wouldn't perceive it in the same way that they would perceive counterforce policy. Politics. Nuclear returns and outweighs warning that there's a long time for warning nuclear war. Your evidence also based on models that are proven to be failures declining. That's our claim in 2007 evidence. Your evidence is from the cartoon indicating that would lead to extinction. Your biodiversity takes out the majority of your impact. It's only internally. And why it actually killing any species of warming is quick. It's inevitable. That's our clear evidence. We have already released gas into the atmosphere. The that is rained down upon human population means no possibility of them ever being able to solve for you. You can see the battle over CMR and DADT in Iraq and Afghanistan. It takes out your politics links because they're having the status quo and the status quo push solves Copenhagen. Seconds to 99. Most government groups who prefer U.S. cap trade policy before Copenhagen, but there's also significant apprehension of losing vote instead of the DADT will lead the international toxic the side or placing the U.S. returning the negotiation and realistic shrink markets the momentum so well better as the bill one and the taking concrete extra bad vote probably hurts. Also, there's a lot of space in between. Additionally, the should reject the permutation. Your argument about extra topicality is only sensitive to link. The document links are not unique, but the status quo policy such as the DADT and the Iraq arguments have made about this that the passage of bar evidence indicates that there is large international support and internal disillusionment between the parties means that the conceded uniqueness argument of financial regulations coming first outweighs that draconian evidence means that we come up with the climate bill and the Conan 919 evidence indicates that it's quite momentum. There wouldn't be a possibility because the plan doesn't spill over to any type of anti-bipartisanship. It means that they have no direct internal link to these arguments. They are some links. Also, don't assume that after they talk about disarmament and not any type of hard targeting policy, etc. Our August 920 evidence indicates that jurisdictional battles will inevitably block the cap and trade policy means there's no possibility of them getting it passed in the status quo. The all in 2009 evidence for the Obama's capital on nuclear policy now takes out all of your leading linking the only chance it's for him to salvage a win. That's our Gallagher evidence, Cyber and Gallagher evidence, which indicates that polls and here we prove that would be a win for Obama. Our Mitchell evidence in Texas indicating that he would necessarily reform the agenda. Your winners lose arguments are specific to your internal language, the bipartisanship argument, and the make and break argument is only in the context of bipartisanship. If anything, we control the internal link to then smooth through our calculated viral evidence, which indicates the plan would foster bipartisanship by being spun as the national security argument. In the Kilpatrick evidence, there would be no backlash from the plan. There is little interest within the floor. The time your evidence doesn't quantify your link arguments. Additionally, the latter evidence indicates that 22 spent all of the capital in the status quo. Every ounce argument is in the context of this is income evidence indicates that you can recover Obama because of current disputes.
336.
Someone here?
349.
Well, a lot of people think they were earlier on the radio.
Was it this top part?
one that's laid back. Kansas, we have an apple. Sometimes more.
Okay, counterclaim, CMR, politics, Russia, Good.
Not going for it. CMR also not going for it. You can see the arguments, multiple differentiations between CMR class and temple and status quo. These arguments don't take out the influence politics. A couple reasons. A, they have no evidence these conflicts will ever come up for healthcare, DADT, etc. is not on the agenda. B is that there are conflicts between the United States between the president and the military, not in the legislation. They consider our new legislation internally. Two, politics are evidence indicates putting more things on the agenda before healthcare. The would cause I'm going to trade off this bill because they have zero evidence these things will be on the agenda in Congress means they don't trade off with internal. They have zero evidence that controlling political capital now that healthcare they've made a devastating concession. They conceded the argument that if healthcare passes that boost President Obama's agenda, Obama's going to card in the one mark that means that Obama would do the plan because he'd be able to get through the disarmament commitments that he's been pushing the status quo there. Obama pushed now arguments don't take out the internal because he hasn't actually proposed a piece of legislation which would trade off with healthcare. But the fact that he's pushing it means we've got a massive boost in political capital. You do the plan means we win. A uniqueness argument. You vote negative. The plan will happen. The status quo now. They have not ready card. The nuclear war is warming. You should not. They should be forced to be questioned for the science. They should be forced to be evidence because the science will question of anything. So it probably cause cooling, but they've also considered our salt evidence and the warming outweighs nuclear war because A, it has a larger magnitude to enter the actual extinction, whereas the nuclear war isolated and B is that it's a higher probability. Has a higher probability explicitly answers all their miscalculation. Nuclear war arguments has that the entire Cold War is low probability of climate change takes all the outcomes. It leads to nuclear war because it causes massive ecological escalations, resource wars, etc., which cause states to control and use nuclear conflicts means to control the escalation. They say that means it's inevitable. It's not true. Our say freedom for happens very specific consequences in case that the Copenhagen will be able to adjust specific calculations says Copenhagen will be sufficient. They also consider the water arguments that will lead to jumpstart renewables arguments in case that be sufficient to solve arguments in case we have 100 months to do it, which arguments in case sufficient by the argument doesn't take out the impacts of one of the technical evidence in case that it would change the entire climate, cause massive change, multiple positive feedbacks. It's not just about biodiversity, it's about the entire collapse, it's about collapse of the entire ecosystem and the entire atmosphere. Now the entire atmosphere, the receiver arguments don't take out politics and it's about the legislation. They say that he doesn't think the legislation for Copenhagen involved. We have the spin on this question. They can see the card from the water that last week indicates that the other states see whether or not we pass healthcare as the determinant for whether or not we're going to get climate, whether or not we're going to get climate bill, regardless of whether or not we actually get a climate bill. Arguments indicates that if healthcare passes, other states will think we get a climate bill, which would be enough to jumpstart Copenhagen. Their evidence indicates it doesn't need to get an actual piece of legislation, but our evidence makes the distinction. We might not have to get an actual piece of legislation, but it does have to pass healthcare in order to send that signal that we might get a piece of legislation in the future. TADT to rock, no evidence coming for healthcare. They can see all the evidence from the one that Obama is all in on healthcare now, consuming 100% of political capital. It's the highest thing on the docket. Their financial regulations argument. There's not one first or unique evidence better on this question. Obama is all in on healthcare, spending political capital. They care to spend. There are a lot of political arguments here. The one should hold line has to do it. Too much nuclear development. They say the uniqueness may we control. They said uniqueness may first of all we control the only link which is putting new items on the legislative agenda. They consider our one world evidence indicates that healthcare will save the that's the wrong card. The warranty evidence on this question and the other part, the new legislation link. The uniqueness may. This is kind of sort of not order. Okay. Warranty claim evidence indicates Democrats are getting on board. Obama has the political capital and GOP pull all oppositions. I'm not now answers all the warrants. Warranty evidence indicates that as long as he invests political capital, that will be sufficient to overcome opposition. Even if they have evidence or some opposition, that's what it does assume. World Obama invests massive health, invests massive political capital. Washington Post evidence indicates he'll make the necessary compromises to get it on board. But if there's a new piece of legislation, you won't have the focus to be able to get that through. That is our political capital. Our claim evidence indicates he has to use all of his political capital to get it done with links to our schools. It's not particularly high. The jurisdictional models take out capital trade. I make the distinction above. It doesn't actually have to pass, but it doesn't actually have to pass. It doesn't get healthcare through to make a signal. That conceded argument from one they see Obama pushing the nuclear policy now. They have zero evidence to actually cause political capital, or they will post piece of legislation which doesn't turn out the agenda. He's still investing all his political capital in healthcare now. The winners of an argument. They conceded the distinction that Obama's invested literally his entire agenda in healthcare now. If healthcare doesn't pass, it makes him look like a joker and collapses. Passing some random nuclear policy issue would not be sufficient for a win because the only way to get a win is to pass healthcare because he has all of the dice in that path and now bipartisanship is relevant to this interlinks bipartisanship is relevant to this interlinks they consider we already have enough people on board now. Bipartisanship will cause people to switch their votes on issues critical questions whether or not Obama can invest political capital to persuade the people to get on board. There is backlash to our North evidence indicates to try changing targeting policies, particularly consensus and our legislation when it comes in. They have zero evidence that F-22s will come first before healthcare evidence out that the NPR article was about the last 2 seconds for 1 hour. They had zero evidence that would be part of the NPR. They could see all the arguments on CMR that would have before, and it wouldn't give them cover regardless, because it would still have to add these legislation to the agenda. Now, the Russian advantage. Article 11 says the answer to the Cochrane argument explicitly says there's not a risk of an unauthorized launch as disproved by the entire Cold War. Even if there is an unauthorized launch, it won't escalate to an actual nuclear war because both sides will have an incentive to make sure that it's just one launch and best will be about high fire for obligation fees. It doesn't lead to great part of the war. The thresholds that when controlling expansion is pretty high. Article 11 indicates there's a massive psychological barrier to actually using nuclear weapons to start a nuclear conflict. If you just further high probability warming impacts, articles indicate they look for any excuse possible to de-escalate the conflict, which means they have to have a pretty damn good card on this question. Their mole evidence is also terrible. It doesn't even indicate that there will be anyone who launched nuclear weapons that appears to be disproven by the last 60 years. Where the hell are the moles or Schwartz evidence doesn't indicate that this high probability says it will take 10 years. And also it just indicates that there could be a risk. It says the only warrants is the Cold War proves, but our equivalent evidence impact turns out warrants if the Cold War proves goes the other direction. The answer is a miscalculation. I mean, specifically, there's not an incentive on either side to miscalculate. And even if the conflict starts, our Iowa evidence indicates that it will quickly de-escalate via peace negotiations. Comes the argument there's not a risk of accidents. Because our forward evidence indicates Russia has survived the second strike, has survived the second strike, so it comes in hand. The primacy advantage. There's not much related to primacy. A couple arguments they conceded. First is the nuclear taboo means no one. I think there's a risk of a first strike. This takes out both their advantages. Our sour and first evidence is pretty fantastic. This question China don't have an incentive to overcome it. All of their pieces of primacy evidence are speculative and theoretical. They don't make a claim that whether or not states actually believe this argument also indicates a minimum deterrent assault because they only need to be able to retaliate with one nuclear weapon, which means they think the United States would never change the rhythm, which means they think the United States would never take risk on this question. Even if they went internally to hegemony, they did not extend a terminal impact. They conceded all of our defense in this question. The disease can't possibly lead to extinction, which means they can't access war impact, and hegemony is sustainable. They don't extend the war impact destroyed by war, but even if they extended their only war, just the economy, which arguments indicates the debt will actually decrease and make hegemony sustainable in the long run.
308. You're probably not going to be
Okay, thanks.
order is the Russia advantage, then primacy advantage, then CMR, then laws.
There's no defense why they give you answers to the applicant, whatever. They still have visibility if you consider a target evidence. It's quote, the more targeting, the worse the insider threat, and that was targeting their conflict. No impact from these arguments. He said there would be an unauthorized watch, not about, and unauthorized watch because argument says that the mole would infiltrate U.S. security says it would be able to solve one lunch to use this high threshold argument. Argument says it would be a deliberate attempt to provoke a conflict. We can see that the CMR is low in multiple areas, which means that the likelihood of defective most people who have lost their jobs over major threats with the civilian infrastructure are still everybody says it's empirically disproven or evidence is from 2009. It cites a lieutenant colonel in face on strategic nuclear threats. He worked for the government for more than 30 years and knows about the risk of collapse. He says there's wars. He has also conceded that evidence says he has also conceded the argument would spark a nuclear conflict, but they have no argument that the response to this that is internally new. And it's still one of these things so close. He says there's wars evidence. He says there's wars evidence is 10 years old. It doesn't. Or cites that it would be 10 years. It doesn't matter. He has conceded the one argument that if modernization is slow, it means the United States would strike down because it feels that it is pressured by other nations. He has conceded the NPR argument, which is the Pentagon feels threatened, which is the reason why they feel threatened. They would strike down. Well, Russia is weak with them on the argument about slow modernization. It doesn't. That argument talks about other provocation, which would strike, which would have extended to the United States to strike. He still has to have the argument that this is about a U.S. watching on Russia when he says the convention will quickly. He says that the force will quickly de-escalate. Evidence assumes the threat, assumes the context for arguments. All reference talks about escalation. Our Schwartz evidence is the only one who makes an empirical assessment. His evidence is from a Russian general talking about this Cold War threat, discussing amount of times it would be accidents because it would be a second strike. Our evidence is about the United States provoking Russia in the form of nuclear counter strike. The only that's also conceded the only he has also conceded the only way things conflicts escalate is in the world of the primacy advantage. So even if he went to his uniqueness argument about why primacy is low now, he has conceded the United States will attempt to maintain primacy in the status quo. Nuclear first strike, which will leave precedents. He has not explained any of this lever precedents. Here is why that is standing for them. He has conceded the United States will continue to maintain to achieve primacy. Even if he wins, that will not occur within the status quo. He has conceded that attempt to block multipolarity, which our Pfeffer evidence says is key to solving extinction because it's crucial to solving multiple global crises. Absolutely no answer to this in the 2-hour attack. The United States lever precedents is the only question they have. No defense to a multipolarity deciding when they win the arguments about hegemony, which they have considered the Clark says there's no internally between those things and between those things and primacy. Now he says that there's no internal link because we don't have a first strike capacity. He has conceded several arguments to the Russian and Chinese think we do, which is enough to cause our argument. He says that there's no intent to overcome the United States. He has conceded evidence about Bill Levin, the argument that attacks earlier. He says a minimum deterrence and other arguments. If those things were sufficient, the Russians would not be modernizing the status quo. We have the way evidence describes that process. He says that showing will not lead to internal impact. We concede there's arguments about disease, government system, sustainable arguments doesn't answer our internal argument. And he conceded the argument of the economy of thinking how actually Simon. Even if he wins his arguments and there's nothing else in the docket, there are other issues that obviously affect Obama's ability to practice capital. Most largely is the foreign policy 915 evidence read. And the one hand, there was a major fight between Obama and Gates over things like RW, prisons, the political climate, how the intentions. There are also the other issues like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Donetsk Hotel, which will affect Obama's ability to effectively implement capital because those issues obviously affect his persuasiveness and lawmakers. Even if they don't affect the document, they affect local capital. The healthcare debate, the policy debate. This is a crush. There's absolutely no answer in the 2 hours to any of the major impact defense arguments were read. And the 2AC extended clearly and flagged in the 1 hour. He's conceded several arguments. First, which is a Hollins that says that their climate models, which are allegedly used to justify the impact factors of warming, would outweigh a nuclear war are terminally flawed. He has conceded this argument comes from a senior fellow of the National Center for Public Policy Research, which is why he did not give deference to any of his arguments. Even if it's quality, he also conceded the stamp evidence is warming won't cause extinction. If it did, they wouldn't be able to solve it. This is double line after warming. It's rapidly escalating, which means the cap and trade would be way too slow to be able to effectively solve this war. Warming is not occurring in the short term. It's a plan, but outweigh on time frame. He says that healthcare would be able to give this a boost. He's conceded another damning argument, and this is where the debate really gets nasty. Look, if the argument is there can't be anything in between it, he's conceded this Kunin evidence that says that financial regulation will occur within the interim. Now, even if they win, that there are other things that occur in between. It proves that there will be another bill in between, which proves that we have uniqueness for our terms because there will be other fights in between healthcare and climate, which means that there's only a chance that the plan can lose capital because financial regulation will saddle, which is conceded warrant. If we win the plan to lose capital, it's the only way that he can get a win in between the two processes when they have conceded that there will surely be a loss in the short term. That evidence is completely conceded. He's also conceded that there will be other agenda items on the way to Copenhagen or Shameful evidence or evidence that they received that there will be agenda items even if it is on the table at the time we reach Copenhagen. In what manner? He says we have no evidence of each makes for between nuclear war and magnitude. His magnitude arguments are based on escalation. He's conceded that the mole argument says the United States as a mole would poses the United States in first strike, which would be like to escalate because there would be no motive for it. And as the Russians, they say that they say they have conceded the double line argument above. The answer to that is argument about how these nuclear war is massively longer. We've already several arguments in the short term. For provocation is Copenhagen subsessing it says the least renewables. He's conceded perception argument. We still are enough to boost the process, even if it was here enough for possible speech of some renewable by, but first he still affects some of the impact arguments, if not all. He says we conceded that he's next argument. He says that he says that he's gone on in healthcare. He made arguments before there are tons of partisan issues which will still affect What's up?
Answer the athletes done the agenda.
Oh, the ath won't get done. They have absolutely no consensus. Obama will push kind of force it. It'd be more politically advantageous for him to. If we have any consensus that he would do the ath, which means that there isn't a compelling chance the case argument health care will pass for launches. The argument says that there will be major battles within committee. He has conceded that the climate legislation is terminally affected by financial regulation, which is the reason why even if they were unique disarguments, they still wouldn't be able to win. And he says that the Democrats are on board that political capital be able to solve these. There's tons of opposition with the plan to be able to solve reforms. Evidence will spend political capital on it now. Quote, a nuclear agreement that reduces money spent on weapons won't be a difficult sell. This will be relatively popular and help them assuming when backed by a study or Steinberger and Gallagher evidence. It's the only one in the context of the affirmative that is reverse causal and says it would build political capital even if there were battles in the short term as well. So Mitchell Evans says that quote, the only way you can get political capital is through having Bernie's political capital in the concrete legislature. She was in on the sin. Leonard Sluice means there's no issue arguments. He says that it's not about bipartisanship. If they were more about partisan atmosphere, in Washington would obviously be easier to overcome the issues that resolve health care. Find a piece of evidence that establishes amendments to establish the minority simply makes sense or dollar and lower listens to divide partisan consensus will as Steinberger and Gallagher says that there's support across the board. I don't need to win these defensive arguments about them. Look, when you can see impact defense to your terminal argument, you drop an add-on and you don't have any answers to the argument that there's going to be another piece of legislation in between. I mean, there's all uniqueness for the main term, the possibility there can be a win. This is Basic Crush.